Yo, what's good, my great sages? It's your host, Sage Samurai here, now here today to bring y'all a new What If. This being the What If movie, to what if Deku had Sting's abilities. Now, first things first, I want to say thank you to everyone for being here and tuning into my video. I really hope you guys do enjoy. As today on this video, I'll be doing my first ever collaboration. This being with none other than the GOAT, the main man himself, Zedder. As yes, throughout my entire time away from YouTube, I've been actually making this collaboration video with him, and not just this one, but we also made another one that's going to be coming up on his channel that I'll be linking down below in the description. So if you guys want to see that one, you guys already know what to do. But now moving on from this, I do want to say thank you to everyone once again for tuning into my videos, and also thank you to Zedder for collabing with me on this video. As now with that being said, why don't we begin this what if? So with that being said, let's get started.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different, man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro. Don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do?
So to begin the what if, we're now going to begin with Deku's origins. Dating way back all the way up to the point where Deku is at the age of 8, we will see him and the rest of his family now currently going on a camping trip, as it was supposed to be a little fun family outing and it was supposed to be a relaxing vacation for them since they were pretty stressed about the last couple of weeks. But unfortunately, fate had other plans for them. As you see, during the time of the camping trip, this is when suddenly they will then be ambushed by a lightning storm. This storm catching the entire family off guard, as the dad who was currently driving the car would then try to maneuver out the way of it, but then sooner or later, due to him, driving all sporadically, he ends up crashing into a tree, causing his family to be dangerously close to the storm. Now immediately, seeing how the storm is closing in, this is when Inka would then order the dad to take Deku away to safety, as she would tell him that she would follow along, although he could see that she was obviously having some difficulty getting out of her seat. Now the dad, of course not wanting to leave his wife but also wanting to protect Deku, has no choice but to do so, as he ends up immediately grabbing Deku, getting out the car, and rushing as far away from the storm as possible. Now this will continue on for quite a while, as the dad has to make many sharp turns, he has to avoid many obstacles before eventually he ends up arriving at a cave. And seeing that this cave didn't seem to be at all affected by the storm, this is when the dad would then leave Deku there, telling him that he will be back and telling him that he would go rescue his mother. As the last thing that Deku would see of his father would be him running back into the storm, all the while he has to stand there scared, worried, and surprised about how everything turned out, as he remembered that this was all supposed to be just a simple camping trip, but it was turning out like this. So as the young Deku would be there staring out of the cave and worried for his parents, this is when suddenly he would then begin to pick up on something. As turning his head to the other side of the cave where he can't really see anything at all, Deku could hear the sound of faint breathing in there. Now, this will cause Deku to become curious, as even though it's very common knowledge that, if you hear breathing inside a very deep and dark cave, you're not supposed to go in there. But Deku didn't seem to have that common knowledge, as he just simply walks towards it, almost as if he was being drawn in by something. As Deku would walk further into the cave as it gets darker and darker, before eventually this is when Deku would then end up colliding with something that seems honestly pretty soft. As Deku's butt would hit the ground, this is when he then shakes his head as he looks up into whatever he ends up hitting, as suddenly he would then see a yellow eye then open up, staring right at him, and it was a huge one at that. And Deku, due to being a young child and due to just how unsettling the presence was, he would do the most common reaction that everyone else would have in this situation. He would scream and try running away in terror, as Deku would try to blitz out of the cave as quickly as possible, but the unfortunate thing was Deku was, well, a child. He wasn't really that fast. As Deku was running, he would actually end up falling down to the ground after tripping on some rocks that were nearby, as he ends up actually hitting the ground really hard, and this causes him to wince and actually begin to cry a little bit. As Deku begins to look at, the area where the storm was happening, and then turning back to the darker part of the cave as the yellow eye was still staring at him, this is where Deku begins to actually think that maybe this might be the end, as he closes his eyes, crying, calling out for his mother and father, until suddenly this is when the thing in the back of the cave would then begin to move. As suddenly Deku would then begin to hear loud footsteps approaching him. As he ends up, closing his eyes in terror, continue wishing that his mom and dad were here right now, this is when suddenly the thing that was in the back of the cave ends up becoming dangerously close to him, as suddenly it would then speak, You do know that it's really rude to wake up someone, then just simply run away without saying good morning, right? The creature would then say, causing Deku to be caught off guard by it, as due to being caught off guard, he would then open his eyes as he ends up seeing something shocking, something that he only heard existed in fairy tales, the ones that his parents would read to him. As suddenly standing right in front of Deku would be none other than a ginormous dragon with white scales and yellow eyes, as it would be staring right at Deku, but not with any malice, but with amusement. Now Deku, being so caught off guard and actually terrified at the moment, would then begin to beg for the creature not to eat him. And when the dragon heard this, he would begin to laugh. Eat you? Boy, you're not even a meal. You're literally just skin and bones. What would I get from eating you? The dragon would tell Deku as he begins to release a laugh, with Deku being once again so shocked by the response that he just lays there as he's nearly up to the point where falling unconscious due to how shocking these turn of events have been. With the only thing that's stopping Deku being the fact that he's still very worried for his parents. As suddenly actually remembering his parents after, getting through that whole shocking event, this is when Deku would then suddenly get up as he apologized to the dragon before running off, trying to get to the entrance of the cave to wait for his family, thinking that maybe they might have just arrived. But you see, the thing is, as the dragon will watch Deku go, he would then gain a solemn look on his face. As you see, Deku would then stand right there at the entrance of the cave, once again waiting for his family, as he begins to feel worriedness once again build up. But as Deku was standing there, waiting for any sign of them to appear, this is when suddenly he would then feel something slam really hard into the ground right beside him. As turning his head to look at it, he would then see that the very dragon that was right there from before was now laying its head right next to Deku. As Deku would of course be at first surprised and also a little bit scared, but soon after seeing that this thing was not really eating him and also remembering the joke that it made, this would cause Deku to then lose up on tension but still being quite worried and scared. As the dragon with a serious look on his face would then ask Deku exactly what was it doing in his cave. As Deku, hearing the dragon talking, would once again be quite off-putted by it, but he would give a response, as he ends up telling the dragon that he's just here waiting for his family to come back. And the dragon, once again hearing this, would once again gain this very solemn look on his face, as Deku and him would just be there watching the storm, as the dragon then says that he doesn't feel comfortable leaving a kid here by himself, and tells Deku that he's going to be staying right here with him until his parents would arrive. As for the next 2 hours, we will end up seeing nothing more but both Deku and the dragon just watching the storm, waiting for any signs of Deku's parents. Now Deku during this time would actually talk to the dragon, talking a little bit things about what he learns in school and everything, and the dragon would be doing nothing more but listening with an amused expression, as Deku actually begins to feel comfortable in its presence. But while doing so, this is when once again the dragon would then hear the storm raging on, causing him to frown. As this is when the dragon would then tell Deku to stay right there, as he decides that he's going to go look for Deku's parents himself. As this is where we would then see the dragon take flight, as it ends up exiting out of the cave, releasing its wings before flapping them into the air, as he ends up flying directly into the storm, with Deku looking on in amazement, as he would be there looking on anxiously for the return of the dragon and also maybe just possibly his parents. Now turning to the dragon's perspective, we would then see the dragon as he begins to maneuver through the storm quite easily, as to him it was nothing more but a small storm. But as he was maneuvering through it, he begins to get pretty annoyed with it relatively quickly, this being due to the fact that this thing caused so much damage all around that the dragon was not able to find a good sense of where Deku's parents were, and most of all, he can't even see them. So due to being, quite annoyed with the storm already, this is when suddenly the dragon begins to release a whitish glow, as suddenly it will then release a roar, as this glow will end up bouncing right off of him, dispersing the storm immediately and causing it to finally settle down. As now that the storm had finally passed, this is when the dragon would then get a good look around, only to see something very disheartening. As currently right now, while still hugging each other, the dragon will then see both the bodies of Deku's parents. As you see, even in their final moments, they didn't stop embracing each other, as they would actually be shown hugging each other even after death. As the dragon will look at this with a solemn expression, already feeling bad for the young child. As after seeing that, he discovered them, this is when suddenly he will then fly back to Deku, as we now turn our attention to him. Now Deku would be there waiting anxiously for the dragon to return, as he ends up seeing that the storm had completely passed away, which caused him to smile, thinking that now his family was going to come back to him. But as the dragon was approaching and as Deku would smile, this is when he didn't see them anywhere around. The dragon didn't bring them. As the dragon would land there right on the ground, as Deku would look at it expectantly, wondering exactly where his parents were, this is when the dragon would then suddenly speak to Deku, as he would then try his best to just get the words out of there as quickly as possible, trying to reveal the child the truth. But after taking a good look at Deku and seeing just how innocent he truly was, this would cause the dragon to then stop himself, as he just simply could not go through with it. As instead, he would lie. As the dragon ends up telling Deku that he had been unable to find him, causing Deku to once again tear up, as he begins to wonder what can he do now. As due to his parents not being located, that means, was he just going to be here by himself? Was he going to be alone? But right before Deku can really begin to truly cry and everything, this is when the dragon would then suddenly lower its head as it begins to actually be laying there right beside Deku, letting him know that if Deku wants, he can stay with him. Now Deku looks at the dragon confused, with the dragon giving Deku the best reason that he could, telling him that he feels responsible to look after him, or at least until his parents would come back. And Deku, once again after hearing this, would then look down in deep thought, before eventually he would then agree to this. As the dragon would end up smiling at Deku, with Deku smiling back right at him, until suddenly he would then gain a confused expression, as he then realizes that he doesn't know the dragon's name. To which the dragon, hearing this, would then begin to laugh, as he would then introduce himself. "I am known as Logia. I am the white dragon," he will let Deku know. As now with that introduction out of the way, this will be the very beginning of Deku's new life, as this is where we now end up doing a time skip. So now, flashing forward until Deku is at the age of 12, we will see that by this point he has spent many years with Logia, learning many things from him, including the rare ability known as Dragon Slayer magic. As you see, Deku had grown so close to the dragon, as you could see it more as, the dragon being Deku's uncle and him being his nephew, as the two of them had grown really, really close, with the dragon telling Deku all sorts of stories and Deku being fascinated by the world that he lived in. But you see, unfortunately, this wasn't meant to last forever. As you see, due to Deku learning Dragon Slayer magic and Logia knowing the drawback of this ability, this is when Logia would have no choice but to seal himself away inside of Deku in order to stop the drawback from happening. As we now end up turning to the very day it would happen. So we now see Deku as he ends up waking up in the dead of the night, as he ends up feeling a very light glow happening, as he ends up getting up, closing his eyes, telling Logia to stop it, thinking that Logia was pulling a prank on him. But you see, when Deku is finally able to open his eyes, this is when he then sees something very disheartening, as he sees Logia just laying there on the ground, as he would seem to be very tired and weak, as Deku would then rush towards him immediately, asking if he was alright, as Logia begins to glow. Logia would look at Deku, letting him know that everything was going to be fine and that he was doing this for him, with Deku not understanding a thing. As this is when suddenly, Logia would then begin to glow, as when he glows, he would then begin to fade out of existence, or at least that's how it looked in Deku's eyes. And Deku, seeing this, began to curse out, No, fuck, stop! As this is when he would then begin to use his Dragon Slayer magic, as he tries to use it in some type of way in order to stop this, as he tells Logia to hang on, as he tries to save him, as tears were now running down Deku's eyes. He ends up cursing more than he's ever done since staying with him, as he tries his best to stop it, with Logia seeing this actually laughing. To think that during these final moments, I would actually get the opportunity to see you curse, the dragon would then say, as Deku ends up cursing, telling him that it's not funny, as he tries his best to fix this event right here, right now. But unfortunately, no matter what Deku did with his light Dragon Slayer magic, it did nothing. As Deku has tears rolling down his eyes, begging the dragon to stop, telling him that he would do anything, but the dragon was not listening. Or better yet, it was more like this was now completely out of his control. He ends up telling Deku to take care of himself and letting him know that he would always be watching him. As just like that, this is when the dragon would then suddenly fade away completely out of existence, all the while Deku would be there watching the very spot that he used to be in that was now completely empty, with tears in his eyes. As this will be the day that something would change within Deku. As this is where we now end up cutting back to the present. We will see Deku as he ends up spending a lot of time traveling for a while, but you'll see while doing this he would also be toughening himself up and training. Because you see, due to the events that transpired, this would cause Deku to have no choice but to toughen up, considering the fact that now he was actually truly alone for the first time. And not only that, but due to the events that happened, Deku also felt his philosophy change drastically, as Deku now has a very firm belief that strength was the only real thing that was required in this world. As after all, if Deku had strength, he'd be able to stop what happened to Logia. And if he had strength, he would have been able to stop the storm that attacked him and his parents. As overall, Deku was blaming himself for the events that were completely out of his control, but unfortunately nothing was going to change his mind anytime soon. As now, turning back to Deku when he's in the present, we will now turn to when he finally reaches civilization. As Deku being here, although he still has some very faint memories about it, he was still so amazed by everything he saw. As after all, it's been 4 years since he really seen any type of technological advancement. As after all, he spent most of his time living in the wilderness along with Logia. So as Deku would be there taking in the scenery, this is when suddenly he would then realize that he's actually pretty hungry, as he proceeds to look for a place to eat. Although, due to Deku doing this would cause a ginormous amount of chaos. Because you see, due to Deku being out of the norm about society for a very long time, this will cause him not to understand the social standards as well as the rules that he has to follow, like paying before you eat a meal. As Deku, as soon as the food would arrive, he would just scarf it all down and thank the people for the meal before just leaving, just like that. As the people would tell Deku that he has to pay, with Deku telling him that he has no money or really any type of currency at all. As they just tell him, then why the heck did he eat the food, with Deku saying that he was hungry. As basically this ends up turning out to be a very comedic and chaotic event, as many restaurant owners are just over here wondering what the heck is wrong with this kid. But right as this chaos was happening, this would cause a villain to then have the opportunity to then emerge. As seeing all the chaos happening, the villain would then suddenly use his opportunity to then rob the restaurants, as he then immediately breaks in there using his quirk, demanding that everyone offers up every last bit of their money and change and basically everything that they had on them, causing even more chaos to happen as people would try to run away, as people would scream out in terror. But you see, when this was happening, due to this chaos growing even further, this would cause Deku's meal, as he was just casually eating, to then be knocked out of his hands. As Deku would then look on in complete horror as his food would then hit the ground, looking soiled and dirty. As this will cause Deku to feel pure, white, hot anger. As we now turn to the villain. The villain would be there demanding for everyone to offer up everything that they had on them, but while he was doing this, as people were, walking towards him to give him everything they had, this is when suddenly he would then be blindsided by a punch, as he then gets sent flying while someone was cursing out at him. "Hey, you asshole! You cost me a meal!" Deku would shout at the villain after punching him, as he ended up cursing at him over and over again for costing him his meal, when the villain wasn't even the one to bump into him. But Deku did realize that the chaos grew even further after his presence, so he decided to blame him. As the villain soon ends up recovering from the blow, as this being due to the fact that Deku is still a young child, so his punches aren't that strong enough to the point where he's able to knock out anyone with one punch. This is when the villain would then tell Deku that he made the biggest mistake of his life, with Deku telling him to bring it on. As just like that, we would then see a fight between both Deku and the villain, as people would then scream and run away in terror, as this ends up catching the attention of the heroes and surprising them, as they see Deku facing off against the villain and actually dominating, as even though Deku was not incredibly strong and everything like that already, he was still fairly strong for his age, probably the strongest one of his age range, as Deku was putting the brakes on the villain, with the villain telling Deku that he's an annoying brat, with Deku telling him that he needs to pay for his meal. As the heroes, after getting all caught off guard by this is when suddenly they would then rush over there in order to capture the two of them. As we will now turn to when finally everything will settle down. So after capturing both Deku and the villain, the police as well as the heroes would then berate Deku for using his quirk, to which Deku tries to let them know that he doesn't have a quirk, as when they ask him if he has any parent or guardian, he lets them know that he doesn't have one right now, saying that they're missing. Now this will cause both heroes and police officers to feel worried, but for now they decide that after Deku had been berated enough, that he was going to stay temporarily at the orphanage, or at least until they can find his parents. But you see, this event was quite huge already, as even though the heroes did intervene, it was still able to catch the attention of the news, and this even ends up catching the attention of UA. As Nezu, after finding out about the events that transpired, would end up wanting to go meet Deku, to which he does so after traveling to Deku's orphanage. Now when Deku and Nezu would end up meeting with each other, they end up having a small little discussion where Deku actually begins to reveal about his childhood, including the events that happened with Logia. And Nezu, although not fully believing Deku's story, he would still actually want to help him, as after all, in Nezu's eyes, he sees a kid with a very dangerous ability that he has no at all control over, as although Deku did put up a pretty good fight against the villain, who knows exactly what he would do with it when left unsupervised. So due to that, this is when Nezu would then offer Deku for him to stay at UA. And Deku, after hearing this, would be deep in thought as he does remember teachings that he got from White Logia, letting him know that he shouldn't just barge in randomly into other people's places. As Deku, hearing this and once again getting reminded of these words, would then begin to think very carefully of it, as after all, he can't exactly go to a stranger's house. Besides, I don't really trust that guy, Deku would think mentally. As looking at Nezu, he would begin to feel his beady eyes looking directly at him. He can sense evil. He knows he shouldn't trust him. Or at least until Nezu would then offer Deku free food, which causes Deku to agree immediately. As Deku could have sworn he actually heard White Logia in the background telling him that he was an idiot. As this is where we now end up doing a time skip. So now flashing forward to past the UA entrance exam, we will see Deku as due to him staying and training at UA, he wouldn't need to take the exam, as many of them already know how strong he really is. As after staying at UA for many years, Deku had grown way stronger compared to when he first arrived, as he had changed both physically and mentally. As Deku had trained personally with professional heroes and even got the opportunity to train with the likes of All Might himself, all the while studying and learning all the required information that he needed at his age. But you see, due to Deku going through all this, his personality had changed as well, as due to getting all these type of special treatment, Deku has grown very arrogant and overconfident, as he firmly declares that he will become the #1 hero and that there's no one in his age range that is actually stronger than him, as he firmly holds on to that belief. But you see, those were not the only things that changed out for Deku, as during the years of him staying at UA, Deku would often leave undetected in order to go on his own little adventures, causing mishaps here and there, fighting animals in the forest, and overall just simply having fun. As on one of these adventures, as Deku would be going into the woods, just simply jumping from tree to tree and having fun, this when suddenly he ends up losing his balance, causing him to slam hard into a tree, and causing both him and something else to fall from it. As Deku ends up getting up, wincing from, hitting his head really hard, this is when he then finds something very surprising, a ginormous egg standing right in front of him, with this egg having a very unique design to it. And Deku, after seeing the egg, already having the thoughts of eating it right here, right now. But you see, just as Deku was about to be in the process of cooking the egg, this is when suddenly it would then begin to shake once, then twice, then 3 times, before eventually it will then begin to glow. Deku's eyes go wide as he still holds on to the egg before finally it will then suddenly crack open to reveal nothing more but a cat. And not just any cat, a cat with wings? As suddenly he will then see this very weird cat then begins to fly around him before eventually it will just calmly land on his head. And Deku, due to being unsure about what exactly to do at the moment, he would then decide to go back to UA in order to speak about this with Nezu. Now, when Nezu was able to see the cat for himself after Deku had brought it back and after hearing about Deku's adventures, he would then tell Deku that he should be the one responsible of taking care of the cat. Although he wasn't exactly sure if that was an actual cat or maybe a kid with a quirk, he decided for now that since Deku was the one to kind of, release it out of its egg, then he should be the one to take care of it. Now Deku, after hearing this, will then suddenly pick up the cat from his head as he then gains a very thoughtful look on his face as he looks at it. And the cat, although being quite sleepy, would then look at Deku before smiling at him, which ends up causing Deku to smile back, as this is when he would then firmly name the cat Lecter. As from that day on, both Deku and Lecter would end up becoming best friends, with Lecter becoming Deku's #1 supporter since the very first day he would ever speak, as he would always be there to cheer on Deku, telling him how amazing he was, and always having full confidence that Deku would be able to pull through. As now that I caught you guys up on everything that happened to Deku throughout the years, this is where I'm now going to turn back to the present. So we now turn to when both Deku and Lecter would arrive in Class 1A, as Deku had been placed here due to the fact that they already know exactly what his skills and abilities are, so they decided to put him here considering the fact that he's already proven that he deserves to be among this class. So as Deku would enter the class, immediately everyone would then turn their attention onto him, as Deku would then casually say hello. Now, some people would respond back, with others just, completely ignoring him, like Bakugo, as Deku would then begin to just communicate with his classmates and begin to befriend them. As they begin to ask Deku questions about himself, wondering why he wasn't at the UA entrance exam, with Deku confidently telling them that he didn't need to do so since the school already knows exactly how strong he is. This causing everyone in the class to be surprised by how confident Deku was, until suddenly someone would then interrupt. So basically, you got in here because of pity. You don't seem like much to me anyway. Bakugo would say from his seat, and this ends up causing everyone to be quiet as Deku wouldn't stare daggers at him. And Lecter, being the one to immediately defend his friend, would immediately speak out, telling Bakugo that Deku was the best and that no one can beat him. And of course, Deku, hearing this, he would then tell Lecter to calm down, as he then tells Bakugo that he doesn't care exactly what some weakling has to say. With this response immediately angering Bakugo, as both him and Deku would then begin beefing with each other immediately in the middle of class. As everyone would watch on in pure confusion, as they can't help but notice that these guys were getting angry at each other for being the same thing. As this is where Deku begins to really reveal his arrogant side, as both of them just begin to talk about how great they are and telling the other one that they're weak and stupid. As both of them would then finally end it off with them both declaring their dreams to become the #1 hero and telling the other one that they're never going to be able to beat them. As this will continue on all the way up to the point until Aizawa would enter into the class, as this will be where class would then begin for the very first time. And by the way, for those wondering exactly why Bakugo and Deku did not know each other, it's because of the fact that in this timeline, Deku had went to a completely different school. So that meant that him and Bakugo had no type of chemistry, even before Deku had went on the camping trip. As now that I finally explained this is where we now turn to the next following days, as we now flash forward past the quirk apprehension test. As the main reason why is because of the fact that Deku passes it with no problems, and Aizawa still tricks everyone else. So basically, explaining that part would be kind of pointless. So for the next few days, we will see Deku as he would continue connecting with his classmates while also occasionally beefing with Bakugo, all the while Lecter would always be there cheering Deku on and supporting him. As this will continue on all the way until eventually it was finally time for the battle trials. As you see, we will see Deku now currently equipped in his hero costume, which if you guys want a reference, it looks like Sting's outfit during the Grand Magic Games. As we will see that him along with Ochako would be facing off against both Bakugo and Ida. As Deku, after seeing this opportunity, would then smirk, as immediately after everyone was settled down and after all the matches were now placed, this is where we would then see Deku and Bakugo then finally face off against each other. As we now turn to the scene, we enter with both Deku and Ochako as they are making their way through the building, as the two of them were currently right now making a plan. With Deku saying that he's going to be the one to take care of Bakugo, all the while Uraraka would be the one to face off against Ida. Now, she tries to ask Deku if he was really okay with it, with Deku letting her know that he has full confidence that she'll be able to pull it through, causing her to blush as she nods her head in agreement. But right before the two of them can continue talking, this is when suddenly Bakugo would then intervene as he throws an explosion in their direction. With Deku, after seeing this, smiling, as this is when suddenly he would then begin to release white energy from his hands, as he ends up just simply batting away the explosion as if it was nothing. As this is when Deku would then tell Uraraka to go on ahead, as he ends up staying behind to face off against Bakugo. As we now end up seeing the two of them now stare down at each other, neither one of them making a move, as they would then begin to just do their typical routine of trash talking. "I can't wait to knock you off your damn pedestal, you arrogant prick," Bakugo would tell Deku, with Deku laughing in response, as this is when he then begins to mock Bakugo back. "Arrogant prick? Are you one to talk?" Deku would say, as this would cause Bakugo to then get angry as he then rushes at Deku with an explosion, with Deku smirking as this is when he's able to dodge out of the way before slamming Bakugo with a nasty gut punch. And just like that, this is when the fight would then truly begin, only for everyone to see something very surprising, and only for Deku to feel immediate disappointment. As the fight between Deku and Bakugo, there was no glory to it at all. In fact, it was boring, as Deku was just overwhelming Bakugo in every sense of the word. As Bakugo tries to throw an explosion, but Deku, he's able to see the attack coming a mile away, dodging out of the way of it and just punching Bakugo, sending him flying. As Deku would just simply walk over to him, just feeling bored about the whole thing, as he begins to ask Bakugo if he has anything at all that can interest him. And Bakugo, after seeing that he was getting done so dirty in the fight, as Deku just ends up literally breaking him down and using a fighting style that interrupts him from moving at all, this is when Bakugo would then try using the gauntlets. As this is when he then tells Deku to try to take this, with All Might screaming at him not to do it. As just like that, we would then see Bakugo then release a ginormous explosion within the building, as they would then rush towards Deku, with Deku staring at it with a bored expression. As just like that, we will then see Deku then get supposedly hit by the attack, with the impact being so strong that it shook up the entirety of the building. As everyone would look on with bated breath, wondering if Deku had survived, only for them to be surprised. As Bakugo would look on in pure shock as he ends up collapsing down to his knees, as he couldn't believe it. Even after throwing such a devastating explosion towards Deku, Deku was revealed to be nearly completely fine, as in fact, other than a couple of dust that landed on his clothing, Deku was a-okay. As he ends up walking towards Bakugo, as he ends up telling him that he was nothing more but a disappointment, as this is when Bakugo would then get roundhouse kicked in the face, causing him to be sent flying and crashing out of the building. As everyone that was watching the fight would look on in complete amazement, as he couldn't believe that the one that got the highest score in the entrance exam was made into a joke, as legit Deku had been able to low diff him without any difficulties at all, as this would cause everyone to wonder just how strong Deku truly was. Although with Deku, we will see him now having an extremely bored expression, as just like that, this is when it would then be revealed that him and his team had won, as Uraraka had been able to beat Ida and had been able to touch the bomb, causing for them to win the match. This bringing a quick end to Deku's battle trial, as we now end up doing a short time skip. So now turning to the end of the battle trials, we end up seeing everyone go through their matches all the way until the very end of the day when it was time for them to leave. As we see Deku now preparing to head off home as he prepares to go back to the dorms in UA, only to then be stopped by none other than Bakugo. As Bakugo would stand there tired and wounded, as you can see that he still hadn't fully recovered from the battle, as this is when he would then firmly declare to Deku that while yes he may have lost to him this time around, that the next time they'll face off against each other that he would win. But you see, Deku after hearing this, instead of just simply smiling or insulting Bakugo or really doing anything of the sorts, he would actually do something very surprising and very disrespectful, as he just simply ignores what Bakugo has said and walked past him, as Bakugo's eyes would go wide as the message was very clear. As after the battle trial, Deku had no longer saw Bakugo as a rival, he no longer saw him as a threat, and overall Deku didn't see him as a challenge. As this is where we now end up doing a time skip towards the USJ. As the one who's going to be covering up this portion will be none other than the GOAT, the main man himself, the legend, Zether. As now with that being said, I'm passing the mic to you, my dude.
Immediately picking up our story right where Sage had left off, we zoom in on Izuku and Lecter in the back of the bus as everybody in Class 1A would be pretty much murmuring and talking about who the strongest in the class is. Up to now, the entire conversation would revolve around Todoroki's incredible performance against, I think it was the tail guy and Tokiyami? I'm not sure, but basically they're all going crazy about the fact that Todoroki literally walked in there, touched the bomb, and walked right out. And like, the dude had a flawless victory, right? But then you also have to consider the fact that Izuku just completely embarrassed Bakugo. I mean, there was no question who was the stronger between those two. So nobody would be talking about who the strongest is in regards of Bakugo. But even still, Lecter hearing that Todoroki and Izuku's names are even being used in the same sentence would immediately pipe up before telling everybody that they're all wrong. The strongest in the class is clearly Izuku. I mean, sure, is that kid with the ice quirk powerful? Of course, but that doesn't mean that he can stack up to him. I mean, seriously, were they watching the same feed or what? These guys must be blind or something. This would lead Todoroki to looking at him kind of annoyed, as Izuku would turn back towards Todoroki being like, what? You got a problem? You got a problem with Lecter, you got a problem with me. Got it? As Todoroki would stare at him, not say anything, and from here everybody in the class would be like, so what's the deal with him? Why is he always with you? As Izuku would go on to explain that that's his best friend, and because he runs this place, he gets to do whatever he wants. As from here, Aizawa overhearing this would be like, the kid just gets more and more cocky every year. As from here, Izuku and Lecter would both kind of stay quiet, with Bakugo staring daggers at Izuku, and Izuku literally blowing a kiss towards the direction of Bakugo, being like, what, you like what you see? Take a picture, it'll last longer. As from here, Bakugo would grit his teeth before thinking to himself that he knows that he can't do anything yet. But he promises he's gonna crush Izuku one day. He's gonna get back for everything that he did to him. Never in his life had Bakugo been so humiliated, been made to feel weaker, beneath somebody else. All his life he had been told that he was better than everybody else, that he would live up to these expectations, and now, for the first time in his life, just like in the original, he was forced to realize that he had been living in a bubble, with everybody telling him exactly what he wanted to hear, not knowing that in reality, there were many people out there far stronger than him. And Izuku, he was just one example. As from here, the students would finally end up arriving to the USJ, where they would go on to meet Pro Hero 13, as she would go on to explain to the classroom how quirks are very, very incredible, but they're also super dangerous, giving the world's lamest speech to the classroom of something that they all literally are aware of. As from here, the class would pretty much begin to all settle down, as eventually a purple mist would arrive in the center of the USJ, before then asking them if it's cool if they crash here, as suddenly a multitude of villains would begin teleporting into the USJ from multiple angles, and Izuku, realizing exactly what's going on, would aim one hand out as he would shoot an energy beam straight towards the direction of Kurogiri, which would go right through him, but shockingly would actually cause damage to Kurogiri's strange mist-like body. This would lead Izuku and Lecter to being teleported away into the water section of the USJ. But before they could actually land in the water, Lecter, using his Exceed wings, would proceed to catch Izuku as he would say, "Hey, looks like I saved us there, didn't I?" With Izuku saying, "Yeah, you sure did, buddy. How about we go save our classmates while we're at it?" And from here, Izuku and Lecter would go on to save Tsuyu and Mineta, fly towards different sections of the USJ, helping out his weaker classmates, as finally, Izuku would tell Lecter to drop him there, as Lecter would proceed to drop Izuku, and he would fall from 50 feet in the air, as Izuku mid-flight would begin to just suck in all the air and energy around him, as he would say, "White dragons, roar!" shooting a massive beam of energy straight towards the direction of the Nomu, completely obliterating it, which was currently in the midst of smashing the head of one of his senseis, which Izuku was sort of amused by, because if he's being honest, Aizawa never exactly rubbed him the right way. So after Izuku would land at the ground, a whole multitude of villains would surround him, as Izuku, seeing this, would smile before then saying, "White dragons flash!" And instantly from his hands he would create a little thing where he would create little holes in his hands, which light would begin shooting out in all directions, blinding most of his opponents in front of him, as from here Izuku would use a multitude of different attacks: White Dragon's Claw, White Dragon's Iron Fist, White Dragon's Holy Breath, and White Dragon's Talon, as it would take out a multitude of villains, like 25 in total, as Shigaraki, seeing all this, would be completely shocked. But from behind Izuku, the Nomu would begin regenerating, as the muscle fibers would begin connecting the tissue and bones would begin appearing in the Nomu, as it would slowly begin to stand up, as Izuku would currently be smirking at the direction of Shigaraki, and suddenly the Nomu would come in before hitting Izuku in the back, sending him crashing to the ground, who had let his guard down, thinking himself too strong to be hurt by these villains. As suddenly, Shigaraki would say, "How does that feel, hero? The Nomu here was made to have the strength that rivals All Might." As from here, Izuku, getting up from the rubble, would say, "All Might, huh? No wonder that actually kind of tickled." As from here, would crack his neck and knuckles, looking towards the direction of the Nomu, before then saying, "You know, it's been a while since I've cut loose. Might as well do it on this thing since it can clearly regenerate." As from here, Izuku would say, "White Drive," as white scales would begin to cover his face and a white holy light would begin to engulf the entire area. Izuku had tapped into his dragon force, and from that moment forward, nothing was safe. Izuku, instantly using a White Dragon's Crusade Hammer, would begin to smash at the Nomu. As from here, he would use Dragon Slayer's secret art, Holy Nova. As from here, creating a massive gigantic beam, he would fist his hand before smashing it into the Nomu, with this light literally destroying every single cell, fiber, and atom that Izuku would punch right through, which would lead the Nomu to look at him before then screeching out, as Izuku, quickly wasting no time, grabs onto the Nomu's legs, heaping it up into the air before then saying, "White dragons roar!" shooting the thing out of existence completely. This would lead Izuku to now looking towards the direction of Shigaraki, who in fear would quickly step into Kurogiri's portal, leaving the scene immediately. As flashing towards Shigaraki's point of view, we would see him in a cold sweat standing before Kurogiri and before the TV set that All For One was currently speaking through, as Shigaraki would say, "He's a monster. We couldn't do a thing against him. He took the Nomu out in 2 blows." As All For One would quickly tell Shigaraki to be quiet, telling him not to worry, that they'll account for that the next time that they use a Nomu. As from here, he would tell Shigaraki not to be discouraged and to do better next time, with Shigaraki still sitting there in a cold sweat and thinking to himself that he might even be in over his head. But after that would be said and done, we immediately jump back into Izuku's point of view, as Lecter would only begin to hype up Izuku even more, which would lead Izuku's already big head and ego to just skyrocket through the roof. This would lead to all of the UA reporters and stuff like that ending up arriving at the USJ, and Izuku, not really caring about the consequences, would go up in front of the camera before then telling the villains to just try it again, that he'll be here to take them out just like he did today, as Aizawa would quickly get in the way of Izuku and the microphone as he would say no further comments, as Aizawa, turning towards Izuku, would say, "What the heck was that, kid? You were not supposed to tell the media anything that happened here today. This was supposed to be kept under wraps. Now because of this, we might have to cancel the UA Sports Festival. Heck, maybe even a month of class." As Izuku from here would go on to say that they don't gotta cancel nothing. So long as he's here, this world will be fine. Those villains are going to be running for the hills as soon as they see him in the USJ, or UA Sports Festival, I mean. But anyways, right after that would happen, just like in the original, because of the fact that this was all taken care of and Izuku seemed so confident, and the rest of the students would pretty much end up vouching for the fact that nothing actually went down. They were all safe. None of them even received injuries, all thanks to Izuku and Lecter, as this would lead to school picking right back up, with the media being super curious to find out more about this Izuku kid, who seemingly thinks himself to be so powerful that he's able to be this cocky on national television. This would shock everybody, and everybody's excited to see what exactly is going to go down with Class 1A. So after that would happen, we just immediately time skip straight to the UA Sports Festival, wasting no time, as Bakugo, just like in the original, because he was the first one to get the entrance exam, like he did the best, he ends up giving the speech, pretty much telling everybody that he's gonna win. As from here, Izuku, hearing this come out of his mouth, would just kind of smirk before Lecter would say, "Look at this chump, he still hasn't learned his lesson, right, Izuku?" As Deku would turn towards Lecter and just be like, "Yeah, I guess not. Guess I'm just gonna have to make it hurt a lot more this time." As for this version of Izuku would be just as cocky as the Sting that we get in the Grand Magic Festival. Like, do you guys remember the energy that Sting and Rogue had when they were talking to Natsu, straight up belittling him and making the audience, literally believe that they were so much stronger than Natsu and Gajeel, but the second that everything started, they just proceeded to get whooped? Yeah, that's not gonna happen this time. Instead, he's gonna get his cake and eat it too. So immediately, as soon as the race would begin, Izuku, not being able to use Lecter because this time he has to do everything on his own, would actually use nothing but his own speed. But just that alone would be enough for Izuku to get first place easily, leading him to be having the 1 million point headband during the next event, as a lot of people would actually refuse to be his partner because of the fact that he has that, all but Uraraka, who was previously with him during the UA battle trial arc that we had before this, and we would also have Mei Hatsume, which would ultimately lead him to befriending Tokiyami, requesting his services after all of this would be said and done. And so we would have all of the teams set up, as beginning the match instantly, Izuku would use his white light ability to pretty much blind everybody nearby, letting out such a fat burst of light similar to the solar flare, blinding a bunch of his opponents, as he would come in and steal a bunch more headbands, causing all the teams that originally get eliminated to be eliminated. As from here, Izuku would have a huge smirk come across his face, as everybody else would begin trying to do something about him. But the second that Todoroki turns towards him, trying to regain his headband, Izuku would proceed to shoot a white dragon's roar at him, leading Todoroki and his team to nearly be like destroyed and just completely hospitalized after that, which would lead Todoroki to realizing, okay, let me like not go after this guy. As Bakugo not wanting to fight him here and wanting a fair one-on-one would sort of just avoid him, as with the growl he proceeds to go after the rest of the teams, but there would only be like 3 headbands left out there, and that's exactly what would happen. They would take the headband, Bakugo would take 1 headband, and then the other guys would take 1 headband. So this would lead 4 teams only to be the ones that passed, which pretty much means that the rest of them, they kind of ended up like being like minimized. Like there's even less people in the final battles, right? And so what takes place is that because this time that ended up happening, this would lead to Shinso versus Deku in the first round, as Shinso, much like in the original, would quickly begin trying to disrespect and just talk a bunch of smack about Izuku, but Izuku, hearing all this, would just smirk before then blitzing towards his direction and punching him square in the stomach, saying, "You think I'm stupid?" as it would send Shinso flying into the wall, and Shinso would be completely knocked unconscious, as Izuku would say, "Can't believe he thought that would work on me. Him and his stupid little quirk are finally where they belong, at the bottom of the barrel." As from here, he would make his way towards the direction of Lecter, as Lecter begins hyping him up even more. And because to this point Izuku still has yet to get a reality check or anybody to humble him, Izuku's just on a roll. He's as cocky as ever. His cockiness is Bakugo plus Sting combined. This dude is on an absolute mayhem and no one's going to be stopping him, including his next opponent, Todoroki. Picking up with the second match, Izuku and Todoroki would quickly glare at each other, with Todoroki just pretty much vowing to himself that he would defeat Izuku with nothing but his ice, thinking in his own head that he doesn't need anything else and that he's going to prove that he's the strongest, not only to spite his father, but to spite Izuku as well. So the second that the starter's pistol would sound, Todoroki would instantly shoot an ice geyser towards the direction of Izuku, as Deku, smirking as he sees this thing coming at him, would quickly breathe in before then uttering, "White Dragon's Roar," sending Todoroki flying and crashing out of the arena, charring him and leaving him completely unconscious, leading the paramedics to have to rush onto the scene, taking him in a literal you know those beds that those soccer players get taken out on all the time, like when they're faking their little injuries? That's exactly what would happen. And Todoroki would be taken on a stretcher. Yep, that's the word I'm looking for, on a stretcher, straight to the ambulance, where Todoroki would quickly begin to be treated for his injuries, as Izuku would hold both of his hands up, beginning to cheer and just get the crowd excited, telling them all that he's gonna win and show them exactly why he's the next #1 hero. As suddenly, Izuku would walk off of the stage and Lecter would begin hyping him up even more. Everybody's going crazy, expectations are rolling, and everyone's like, "Oh, we can't wait to see the final match." But the final match? Honestly, it's gonna be kind of lame, and the reason for this is because, kind of ironically, Bakugo doesn't exactly have the firepower to even injure Izuku. So the second that this would begin, Bakugo quickly begins shooting up into the air, having developed the AP shot way sooner than a cannon, as he begins blasting these beams at Izuku, who, mind you, would eat them. He eats these light beams that are being shot right at him, as Izuku would say, "Tastes kind of funny. Maybe it might be because you're too weak. You know, Bakugo, you might be about 100 years too early before you can even hope to land a scratch on me." As Izuku would begin to cup his hands, holding them behind him, super similar to what we see Goku do with a Kamehameha, before then aiming a light beam straight at the direction of Bakugo in the air, which would shoot out like a laser beam. Like it's not just it's not just one beam, it's a beam that he's able to control and move around, which would lead him to hit Bakugo, who would try to dodge out of the way, but the beam itself would track him, hitting Bakugo square on target, as Bakugo would begin falling down onto the ground, and instantly Deku would charge at him before then grabbing him by his chest and slamming him onto the ground. Did he have to do that? No, he wanted to. Grabbing him by the throat, he would look at Bakugo before then telling him, "Remember your place. Alright, scum?" As he would walk off, and Bakugo would just be laying there unconscious, as Deku would begin holding his hands up, and during the ceremony of the gold medals being handed out, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Izuku would all get one, but Izuku would be the only one that's unscathed. Not a single scratch mark, not a single scorch mark, nothing. Deku literally went through this entire UA event with nothing happening to him. As like I've been kind of alluding to, Izuku's getting an even bigger head after winning. A bunch of news articles would begin coming out about Izuku, hyping him up as the next #1 hero. This dude is like the LeBron James of heroes. Like everyone is going on about this kid. There's YouTube videos literally ranking how strong he is when it comes to the prospects, ranking him as a top 10 hero already without having ever saved the single person. And even news articles will begin coming out about Izuku's first ever hero showing when he was a child, with people being like, yeah, everyone knew he was going to be a hero from the moment he was a kid. As you know, eventually one news article would begin like getting a bit of traction, but it would kind of be dead. It would be one that said that Izuku was quirkless, but no one's paying attention to it just due to the fact that Izuku clearly has a quirk from what they can see. He has a light quirk, right? Like no one can deny it. You can't say he's quirkless. So that whole news article would quickly be put to rest, but one person would see it, and that would be All For One himself. And honestly, for this specific plotline, I have no idea where I'm going with this. Like, I'm gonna give it a buck. I'm just leaving it for Sage to see what he ends up cooking with this, because I thought that, you know, maybe if I left him a little bit of a challenge, it might be fun. But yeah, no. Anyways, continuing forward with the story, we continue with the students picking out their hero names, as Izuku, much to nobody's surprise, would end up picking the light hero, Sting, as everybody would think that that name is actually super clever. His light literally stings, and it just kind of suits him. The whole vibe he has is actually perfect for that name. As from here, Izuku would now think to himself, what hero internship should I take? And yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that's where my recording's gonna end. I was gonna cover the Stain arc just because, to be honest, this last recording was a little bit short. But after talking with my boy Sage, he told me that it's cool, you know? So if you guys want to keep hearing Sage in another video, we're doing a collab video where I hop on this and he hops on the Shadow Dragon. So if you guys want to go check out what if Deku was Rogue's reincarnation or had Rogue Shadow Dragon powers, then go to my channel, click the link down below in the video. It'll probably be there. I'm really not too sure. But yeah, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it's your boy Zether and I am out. Peace.
Alright guys, so first things first, thank you to Zether for being here on this channel and collabing with me. I really hope you guys did enjoy his parts of this what if, and if you guys want to see more collaboration videos between the two of us, you guys can go and see the video on his channel, which he just mentioned, which we're going to be covering the Shadow Dragon Slayer. So if you guys want to see that, you guys already know, I'm gonna link it down below in the description. Don't worry, I'm going to make sure to do it. But also another thing, if you guys want to see more collaborations between us, then please comment down below in the comment section, because it really gives us like honest feedback to understand like, oh, if you guys want to see more of this in the future. So, you know, just to let you guys know. But still, besides all that, y'all, once again, thank you to Zether. I really hope you guys did enjoy his time. As now with that being said, we're now going to enter into the next part of this what if, this being the hero internship, and more precisely, the Stain arc. So we now begin the events that take place at the Stain arc, right where Zether had left off, as we end up seeing Deku, as currently right now he'll be looking through a bunch of internships along with Lecter. But you see, as the two of them would be doing this one suddenly they will then be called upon by none other than Nezu, as he ends up calling out to Deku on the intercom, telling him to come to the principal's office. Now this will cause them to be quite confused and getting a lot of attention from people in Class 1A, to which Deku just looks at them to, you know, mind their own business, to which they do so. As just like that, we would then see Deku leave along with Lecter, as everyone else will watch on in curiosity, wondering exactly what was going on. Now along the way to the principal's office, we will see Deku and Lecter, as they'll be summing up like their own reasons as to why they're going over there, with Deku thinking that he was going to get some type of special internship, considering the fact that he was actually, you know, trained here in UA. As after all, it would make sense in Deku's eyes as to why UA kind of prioritized him and favored him more than everyone else. As Deku begins to smile in anticipation, thinking that he was actually even going to get an internship with All Might, with Lecter being there to support his idea, cheering on Deku throughout the entire way. As we now end up turning to when Deku finally arrives at Nezu's office. Now upon his arrival, Nezu then gives him a brief explanation as to why he was here, as it was about the hero internship, causing Deku to be excited, but unfortunately for Deku, instead of working for, you know, All Might or another one of the top heroes, instead Nezu decides to set him up with a counselor, this being none other than the hero Hound Dog. Now Deku, when he sees this, he immediately begins trying to argue with Nezu, saying that he was, you know, this was far above him, but Nezu then tells Deku and reminds him that if he wants to, he can literally just simply, you know, make it to where Deku doesn't go to any internship at all. Or better yet, he can make it to where Deku throughout the entirety of the internship is forced to basically become the housekeeping of the entire UA school, causing Deku to immediately grit his teeth, as unfortunately he has no other choice but to go with Hound Dog to begin his internship. As starting from that very moment, for the rest of the internship, you will see Deku spend his time with Hound Dog, as Hound Dog will be teaching Deku lessons, and not only that, but actually giving Deku counseling, which Deku will stubbornly tell him that he doesn't need it, but Hound Dog was very insistent, causing Deku to have no choice but to go through with it. And you see, the thing is, throughout the entirety of the time, Deku did learn a couple of things from Hound Dog, but the thing is, these were things that were not really too important in Deku's eyes, or at least at the moment. As you see, now flashing forward past the hero internship, as I'm not gonna lie to you, a majority of the Stain arc is literally just skipped on, mostly because of the fact that, well, the Stain arc, number one, Deku doesn't have really any real connections with like Ida and like the rest of his classmates like that, so I don't really see him going out there to like help him out. And another thing, something else was happening behind the scenes. As unlike in the main timeline, the events that play out during the Stain arc with Shigaraki trying to talk to Stain and, bringing out a bunch of Nomus, during this timeline it doesn't happen like at all. As you see instead, Stain goes ahead and fights Ida with Ida losing, but luckily professional heroes then intervene, stopping Stain and just capturing him immediately with Endeavor taking credit for it, since he was there during the time. But you see, while that was going on though, in a different part of society in general, we would then see Shigaraki, as instead he was thinking of something else, as he would already be in the midst of the process of forming the League of Villains. And not only that, but they already got their first mission by All For One, as this mission was actually Shigaraki's top priority at the moment, as All For One wanted Shigaraki to take care of it as quickly as possible when they get the opportunity. And he gave every single one of the members a specific instruction that they need to follow in order for the plan to succeed. As the last thing we will see from the villains during this time will be none other than Shigaraki, as he will be getting introduced to none other than both Dabi and Toga, as he ends up smirking underneath the hand that's on his face. As we now turn back to Deku. Now for the rest of the hero internship, we will see Deku as he finally begins to have his last days with Hound Dog, as he's pretty much bored out of his mind and thinks of it all as nothing more but a big waste of time. However, during these final few days, this is when Hound Dog then gives Deku a very good piece of advice. One that Deku didn't know at the time was going to be the most important advice that he ever gotten. This being the fact that Hound Dog lets Deku know that while yes, it was good to focus on his own desires and his own aspirations, he shouldn't focus too much on them because he will begin to lose sight of what's most important. And when Deku hears this, he actually was caught off guard, but at the end of the day, he just shrugged it off, thinking that the advice was not going to be as important as he thought. But little did Deku know just how wrong he was. As soon after the internship would then come to an end, this is when everyone would then return back, as Deku would just be there, bored out of his mind, as everyone were talking about the amazing internship they had, well, except for Bakugo, as Deku would actually laugh at the hair that Bakugo had after he went with Best Jeanist. But unfortunately, other than that, Deku was still quite upset about the fact that everyone else seemed to have a good time with their internships besides him. As he begins to shake his head about the stupidity of this whole situation, this is when finally Aizawa would then enter the class, as this is where we now enter into the final exams arc. Now for the events that happened during the final exam arc, we will see them play out pretty similar to the main timeline, as Deku and the rest of his classmates then get informed about the exams, as they will then proceed to do an obstacle course in order to show off all their improvements, with Deku winning his obstacle course quite easily, but everyone can see that Deku was just simply as strong as he was before, and not to say that he was weak or anything, it's just a simple fact that Deku didn't really show anything too impressive that they hadn't seen before. Not that Deku cared, since after all, even if they did improve, he was still the strongest one in the class. As then soon afterwards, they'll then have to take the written exam, to which Deku was able to ace it with ease, before finally it was time for the practical exam. As just as they were thinking that they're going to face off against, a bunch of fake villains and a bunch of other stuff, this is when they would then be revealed that they're going to be facing off against their teacher themselves. And after hearing this will cause Deku to then smile, as he would already be smiling in anticipation about the fact that he's going to fight All Might. Although begrudgingly he has to team up with Bakugo, but he doesn't really care about that. Now mind you, this isn't the first time that Deku actually gets to fight All Might, but you see the thing is, back then Deku was still quite a small child, and he wasn't nearly as strong as he is now. As just thinking about it would make Deku smile even more, as he begins to think that this might be the opportunity to show All Might just how strong he gotten, or better yet, this might be the opportunity to surpass the #1 hero, and actually beat him. As Deku would smile in anticipation, or right before suddenly we will now do a quick change of scenes, as well as a little bit of a time skip. As right after everyone gets done with their own fights, this is when we will then finally turn to when both Deku as well as Bakugo then enter the exam area to face off against All Might. Now along the way there, we will see that both Deku as well as Bakugo don't really talk to each other, which was fine, considering the fact that they were only here to face off against All Might and see how strong they got in. But you see, as they were walking, this is when suddenly they will then get hit with a ginormous wave of wind, as this will be from nothing more but a punch from All Might, as they can do nothing more but look on in pure amazement, as Deku would then smile in anticipation along with Bakugo. As this is when All Might would then begin to walk out a generous wave of smoke that he threw out, as he begins laughing in anticipation before finally entering into his whole villain act, trying to scare both Bakugo and Deku, to which it doesn't work. Now Bakugo will be the first one to rush, as Deku would roll his eyes, as Bakugo then proceeds to do a very pathetic attempt of throwing an explosion at All Might's face and trying to pretty much blow him away. But unfortunately it doesn't work out, as All Might just punches Bakugo in the gut, sending him flying into the air as he then turns to Deku. Now seeing Deku, this is when All Might then begins to reminisce about the times he fought the child, as he begins to laugh, telling Deku that it's been a while, with Deku nodding his head. As this is when he then gets into a fighting stance, letting All Might know that this will be the very moment that he's going to surpass him. And All Might begins to laugh, letting Deku know that it's still way too early for that, as this is when both of them would then tense up before suddenly vanishing. As in the very next second, this is where we would then see the two of them then clash their fists together, causing a ginormous shockwave and destroying a large amount of the fake city that they were in. Now Deku would smile at this, thinking that they were on equal footing, with All Might being surprised by the fact that even though he was being restrained by the weight, Deku was still able to keep up with the attacking power and didn't seem too affected by it. As just like that, this is where we would then see both Deku and All Might then begin to trade blows with each other, as both of them would be doing a non-stop back and forth rock'em sock'em, as they would literally be punching each other over and over again, with neither one giving an inch. Now this was surprised All Might by the fact that how much damage Deku was really doing to him, as if he felt as if he continued taking punches like this, he wouldn't be able to keep this muscular form for too long. Especially since Deku was not holding back at all, as he began smiling, even adding Dragon Slayer energy into his fists as they would glow, doing even more damage. Now All Might, finally having enough of this, will then suddenly jump up into the air before kicking Deku hard in the stomach, sending him flying and crashing into a nearby building. As he would look on at the area while sweating a little bit, as he realizes that if that had continued on any further, then he may have been forced to remove the weights, as he actually thought that he might need to go all out against Deku. But while he was thinking this is when Bakugo would then intervene, throwing an explosion at the back of All Might's head, letting him know not to underestimate him. As for the next couple of seconds, we would then see All Might and Bakugo face off against each other, with unfortunately Bakugo not doing anything at all to All Might, mostly because of the fact that he was just simply too inexperienced and doesn't have too much firepower to do anything. But you see, while this was going on, Deku had finally recovered from the kick that All Might threw at him, as he would then finally rush at All Might, blindsiding him with his own kick, sending the #1 hero flying and surprising everyone. As Deku would be looking on in pure excitement, letting All Might know that that was nothing, as he had been able to shrug off the blow that All Might had landed on him. With All Might soon recovering himself, as he just looks on in pure amazement, as he would then nod his head in satisfaction, letting Deku know that he most definitely grew stronger. As this is when he would then let them both know that it looks like he's gonna have to stop holding back just a little bit. As this is when All Might then begins to actually take it more seriously, as for the next couple moments in the fight, we will then see both Bakugo and Deku then be fighting All Might, both of them one-on-one, or heck sometimes even together, as they're not even like, teaming up or anything like that. It's just the fact that they're just trying their best to land the most damage on All Might, with All Might taking this fight seriously this time, as he's making sure to keep Deku at a distance while also making sure to put down Bakugo in order for the two of them to kind of give him a time to rest. But you see, while this was going on, this is when All Might then realizes that he was reaching his limit, as due to all the punches and powerful blows that Deku was landing, his timer was running out much sooner, as this would cause him to actually cough up a little bit of blood as he curses mentally, as the fight will continue going on like this before eventually All Might has no choice but to surrender. Because if this had continued on any longer, then his secret would then be revealed, and that was something that he just simply cannot allow to happen. So just like that, this will be the end to Deku's exams, as both Bakugo and Deku end up passing, as even though they didn't really cross the finish line or really capture All Might, the fact that the villain had completely surrendered allowed them to pass the exam. As hearing all of this will cause Deku to feel upset, but still nonetheless have no choice but to agree, since he wasn't even going all out just yet. As after all, to Deku, this was all nothing more but a warm-up to him, as the next time that they fight, he will most definitely go all out. Now Bakugo would also leave, but the thing is, he was damaged much more badly than Deku, so he had to be taken to the infirmary, as Deku would walk away, passing the exam, but also feeling incredible amounts of boredom. As now with the final exams finally coming to a close, this is where we now enter into the Forest Training Camp. Now for the events that take place at the Forest Training Camp, we will see Deku along with the rest of his classmates, as the beginning of it starts off pretty similar to the main timeline, as we end up seeing all of them go through all the procedures before eventually going on their trip. As during the time of them being on the trip, we will see both Deku as well as Lecter just chilling in the back of the bus as they will be relaxing. But you'll see while doing so, as they eventually end up arriving at the forest, this is when they will then all be tricked, as this is when suddenly one of the cat heroes will then use her quirk in order to throw them all into the forest. As after that, we will then see the rest of Class 1A then immediately begin to put in work as they defeat all the obstacles that was there in the forest, allowing for them to finally arrive at the camp, as this is where the Forest Training Camp will then truly begin for them. As for the next couple of days, we will see the rest of Class 1A just mostly spending their time at the camp, either training or just enjoying the activities that were there. As during this time, we will see both Deku and Lecter either training or going out to explore the camp, mostly because of the fact that it was quite large and Deku just simply liked, the adventure. But as he was looking around the camp, he would occasionally bump into Koda, as the two of them just simply, look at each other with Koda glaring and Deku just shrugging, as this would cause Koda to glare even further, once again reaffirming his hatred for, heroes. But while this was going on, we now eventually turn to a very specific night, as this would be a night that Deku would never forget. As you see, during this time, people will be currently at the camp, just simply eating a nice meal, all the while Deku will be currently on his own, at the edge of a cliff, as he will be there eating a bunch of meat, along with Lecter, as the two of them were just, talking about different stories and a bunch of other things. Basically, just having a chill homie time. But you see, while they were doing this though, this is when Koda would then also walk up, as he glares at them, telling them to get out of his spot, as this was supposed to be his secret location to where he can get far away from everyone. But Deku, after hearing this, then calmly tells him no, causing Koda to then glare as he tries to hit Deku, with Deku dodging out of the way. Now Lecter begins to scold Koda for even trying to hit Deku, with Koda glaring at Lecter, and basically this ends up turning into an argument between the three. But while this was going on, this is when we would then see that the area where the camp was currently being covered by blue flames. As you see, they were currently under attack. Now this ends up catching the attention of the three of them as they look on in complete shock, only for Deku to then sense a presence as he then grabs both Lecter and Koda and dodges out of a way of a punch, as this is when Muscular would then make his appearance known. Now, of course, Koda seeing this will begin to get shaken up as he gets, reminiscent about the guy who killed his parents, but this is when Deku then tells him to stay calm as after all, he was here. As he goes ahead and sends a very cocky grin, telling Lecter to stay behind him to stay safe, as he begins to pretty much roast Muscular in his entire appearance, while Muscular telling Deku that he's going to enjoy crushing him until he then stops. As after getting a real good look at Deku's face, this is when Muscular would then smirk, as this is when he then tells Deku that he already knows who he is, with Deku being quite confused about it all, but then shrugging it off since he was in the midst of a fight with a white dragon's iron fist, as he then punches him directly in the stomach, only for Muscular to then suddenly wrap himself in these weird muscles that protect him from the blow. But you could see that it still did some quite decent damage on him. Now this will cause Deku to be grossed out until Muscular would then throw a punch at Deku, to which he raises his arm. As this punch would end up doing way more damage than Deku had expected, as it ends up pushing him back and causing Deku to actually grit his teeth, as that punch was almost comparable to, All Might when he has like the weights on. But still, it was nothing compared to the real deal. As just thinking about it would cause Deku to then tell Muscular that his quirk was wasted on him, with Muscular chuckling as he then tells Deku that he's going to enjoy beating the crap out of him, with Deku smirking, before suddenly gaining a serious expression as he sees the flames then grow even bigger, as he then tells Muscular that unfortunately he has no time to play with him, as this is when Deku will then suddenly gain a white energy glowing off of him. Now this energy would memorize Koda and also Muscular, as the two of them would then look on in pure amazement as they wonder exactly what was going on, as this is when Deku would then utter the words, White Drive. As you see, this was a technique that Deku had learned that boosts all his physical stats to the absolute limit, allowing him to be way stronger than he was previously. Now this would cause Deku to smirk in anticipation, as this is when suddenly he would then disappear right before Muscular's eyes, as he would look around wondering where he was, only to then get hit in the side of his face by a powerful white dragon's iron fist, as he then gets sent crashing into the wall, getting knocked out immediately. As both Koda and Lecter would then look on in pure amazement, as Koda couldn't believe just how strong Deku was. All the while Lecter would be there cheering him on, as Deku would thank him before grabbing him and Koda and rushing down the mountain, in order to see how everyone else was doing. As soon after rushing down, they would then encounter Aizawa, as Deku would then leave Koda with Aizawa before heading off into the forest to check on everyone else, all the while Lecter would be there following Deku, unaware that someone was tagging him. As now from this point on, this is where we will then begin to see the rest of the events that play out during this time play out pretty similar to the main timeline, as Deku would end up soon grouping up with the rest of his classmates before eventually they would then realize that both Bakugo and Tokiyami had got captured. As Deku seeing this would immediately rush over, trying to stop the villain as he ends up making his escape. But during the time of Deku chasing him, this is when suddenly he would then see a hand then stick out of a tree, as this would be from none other than Dabi, as he would release his blue flames in order to blindside Deku, with Deku responding quickly and countering with his white dragon's roar. As just like that, this is when not only did Dabi step out, but then this is when Twice as well as Toga and basically the entirety of the villains that were there to attack would also show up there, as they'll be there to surround Deku. Now Deku seeing this then begins to laugh as he begins to ask them if they really think that they're a challenge for him, only for all of them to then suddenly attack without any warning. Now Deku seeing this would immediately enter into his white drive as he begins to put the hands on these villains. I'm talking about none of them were able to touch him. Dabi's flames were too slow. Toga couldn't really, do anything to him. Like she can't really get a sip of his blood or anything like that. Twice, although he was a pretty good shield for the other members, unfortunately, the clones that he would shoot out would be almost obliterated by Deku in an instant. And overall, every single one of the villains were quickly shown to be no match against Deku, as Deku was just treating all this as if it was a game, as he continues hunting down every last one of the villains and just beating them up. Until eventually, as Deku would be there beating up on Twice, this is when suddenly he would then be called out on by Dabi, as he would tell Deku to stop. Now Deku, hearing this, then roll his eyes, as he then turns his attention onto Dabi, trying to kind of sneer at him, only to then stop as his face would then turn into a look of terror. As casually right now being held by Dabi and was currently right now shedding tears was none other than Lecter, as he would be looking at Deku, begging him to stop, with Deku doing so immediately, even getting out of his white drive, as he then tells and demands for Dabi to let go of Lecter in here and now, as he shows a look of pure fury as well as terror. But you see, Dabi was seeing this, and instead of letting go of Lecter, he then begins to laugh, letting him know that he was not going to do that anytime soon, as Deku could actually see that Dabi's hands were actually heating up a little bit, causing Lecter to squirm, as he then glares angrily as he clenches his fist, as he would tell the villains that they finally got him, letting him know that he won't attack them any longer. But yet, even after hearing this, Dabi doesn't release Lecter, causing Deku to then glare at him, letting him know to release Lecter here and now, and that he swears that he won't attack them. But this is when Dabi then begins to question Deku, basically asking, and what exactly type of flimsy promise is that? After all, that seems like a very stupid deal if he ever heard one. Just because Deku says that word, that means that automatically he's not going to attack them? That sounds stupid. And this is literally the only reason why Deku's not attacking them, so if he were to let him go, what exactly is stopping Deku from not just going all out on them and making them pay for their crimes? They've seen how fast he is, he could do it in an instant. As Deku would glare at him, letting him know that he won't attack him and that he swears, but unfortunately Dabi wasn't convinced. As this is when they would then make an agreement, telling Deku that, how about this? If Deku were to come along with them, then they will release Lecter. Now this would cause Deku's eyes to then suddenly be covered in shadows, as Lecter will be telling Deku not to agree to it, letting him know that he was going to be okay, only for Dabi to once again heat up his hands, causing Lecter to then actually release a wince, as Dabi tells him to be quiet. And Deku, seeing this, would then grate his teeth, as Lecter begs Deku to then, not go with them, only for Deku to then calmly tell him that he was alright. As he will then suddenly look up at Lecter, sending him a smile, a warm one at that, as this is when Deku then agrees to the terms. And Lecter, hearing this, will then begin to cry, as he then looks on with pure horror as he tells Deku not to agree to it, with Deku letting him know that it was going to be okay. As this is when a portal would then open up, as Deku would look at it with a passive expression, just as he would then walk towards it, as Lecter would be begging for Deku not to go, with Deku saying goodbye to Lecter for now, as this is when he would then fully be consumed by the portal, as just like that, Izuku Midoriya had been successfully captured. As this is when the League of Villains would then look at each other before nodding, as they would then suddenly let go of Lecter, or better yet, they just simply throw him away, as they would then all walk through the portal as well. As this is when finally the rest of Deku's classmates would then arrive as well, as they look at the scene, as Lecter would be there crying as he tries to rush to the portal, only to see that he was too late. As for the very first time ever since the very beginning of this entire story, the League of Villains truly can be considered the winners in this whole event, as we now finally end up doing a time skip. Now for the next couple of days, as Deku would be captured by the League of Villains, we would then see him just casually be there, but you can see that his eyes were now kind of hollow, as Deku will be looking down at himself, as this will be the very first time that Deku truly felt defeat, as he truly begins to wonder what exactly went wrong. As after all, Deku was beating these guys. Not only that, but Deku was most definitely stronger and faster than them. Yet somehow, someway, they had been able to capture him. And not only that, but they had also have been able to actually land a hand on Lecter. Something that Deku swore that no villain would get the opportunity to do so. Heck, no one had been able to get the opportunity to do so. Yet somehow these villains did, while Deku was literally paying attention to Lecter. And Deku can't help but feel ashamed about it, considering the fact that every single time he closes his eyes, all he could remember was Lecter crying as he begs for him not to go. And seeing his best friend there crying while he's unable to really do anything of the situation, it caused Deku to literally feel ashamed and disgusted, wondering what was the point of all this strength if he can't go ahead and protect his friend. And while sure Deku had been able to get Lecter away from them, he still had to end up sacrificing himself, something that he only saw in movies. And whenever he saw it, he usually thought that that was usually like the weak way to go out. But yet here he was doing the same thing. As Deku can't help but feel once again just upset about everything, as he wonders what would Weiss Logia even say to him if he were to see him again. as Deku thinking about White's Logia after such a long time will cause him to actually feel even more upset as he looks down. Now for the next following days, as Deku would stay with the League of Villains, they'll be there trying to make conversation with him, but unfortunately Deku wasn't budging. In fact, he just mostly stayed up in his own head. But you see, something very interesting did end up happening during that time, that being the fact that Deku actually had a conversation with All For One. As turning to the scene, we will then see Shigaraki as he enters inside Deku's area, but he just simply glares at him before suddenly placing a monitor right in front of Deku. Now Deku doesn't say anything or respond, as this is when Shigaraki will then turn on the monitor, as suddenly appearing right in front of Deku will be a man in a suit, this being none other than All For One. Now when Deku ends up hearing All For One's voice, he just simply looks at him, feeling quite bored about the whole thing, as All For One would then begin to describe to Deku about his philosophy of quirks and everything about it. Before eventually, this is when he would then begin to discuss about Deku, his abilities, how fascinated by them he was. As Deku will be looking on, hearing everything as he feels nothing more but disgust towards this man, as basically he's treating all this as nothing more but a plaything, almost as if it was a shining jewel that he wants for his collection. As he ends up telling Deku that he knows that his quirk is not like any other that has been seen before, and letting Deku know that he will make sure to take good care of it, and telling him that he should be remaining to be cooperative with them until the process arrives, or else he can make Deku's life a little bit more difficult. As Deku would be there listening to all this, not saying a word, as this is when All For One would then finally cut off the screen, as this is where we now finally turn to the present. We will see Deku as he'll be sitting down while the rest of the League of Villains will be there discussing about their next plan of action. But you see, while doing so, this one suddenly they will then get a knock at the door. "Pizza's here," the man would then shout out from behind the door, as everyone would then look at it, until suddenly this is when All Might would then come smashing in along with the rest of the heroes, as they're here to rescue Deku. Now Deku looking on would be, of course, just surprised about the whole thing, but just as All Might was about to, rush in there and, save him, this is when suddenly he would then be covered in a ginormous sludge, as Deku tries to, escape from it, but unfortunately, it was too late. As he, as well as the rest of the villains, would then suddenly end up making a quick getaway, thanks to All For One, as All Might would then scream out no, as he can't help but curse his failure. Now in a different location, we will see Deku as he ends up awakening, as we would then see him in this dark faculty-like area, as Shigaraki and the rest of the villains were also there as well. As they'll be looking around before saying that Deku was now, freed, as they didn't bum rush him, with Deku immediately turning on his white drive, only to then get blasted by an unknown wave of wind, as he ends up getting sent flying out of the location, as suddenly Deku would then be outside of the facility as he looks up, as casually right now, still in his suit and floating over Deku, will be none other than All For One, as he ends up telling Deku that it's about time that they begin the process. As suddenly creating these weird like tendrils from the tip of his fingers, he will then shoot them out towards Deku as he ends up dodging out the way relatively quickly. But this is when finally the rest of the villains will then rush over as well, as they all begin to gang up on Deku as he ends up cursing his luck. Now fortunately, other heroes were there, but thanks to All For One's presence, he was kind of keeping them at bay, using his other quirks to push them aside and making sure to keep a distance from him and Deku. Now this will cause Deku to be there as he ends up cursing his luck, as he ends up entering into his white drive, dodging all the villains and actually pushing them back, but All For One will be there always intercepting him, as basically Deku was now getting jumped, as he ends up cursing his luck for all of this, until eventually All Might will then finally come in swinging, as him and All For One will then clash. Now this clash will cause a generous amount of destruction and blow away everyone, as Deku will be caught up in, the generous shockwave, as he gets pushed back along with the rest of the villains that were there. Before eventually it was now just Deku facing off against the regular League of Villains, including Shigaraki. And Deku seeing this would then begin to smirk, as he already knows that he has the power to take them on, until suddenly this is when he would then hear a voice call out to him. Now Deku hearing the voice would then begin to panic, as he then looks to the side to see none other than Lecter. As yes, you see, the thing is very similar to the main timeline. We will see that an entire team had been formed by the Class 1A students in order to rescue Deku, as although he was quite arrogant, he was still their classmate and to some even a friend, even though Deku didn't really consider it like that. As they would then be there calling out to Deku as they had found an opening where he could escape. And Deku seeing this would then begin to panic, especially when Lecter begins to fly over to his direction, as Deku seeing this would then immediately begins to curse, as Kodogiri and Shigaraki then turns to the cat. And Shigaraki seeing this would then begin to release a very malicious smirk, and Deku seeing this, he felt his heart drop, as he then curses mentally, "Ain't no way, ain't no fucking way," as this is when he would then begin to disappear in a blinding white light, as he then appears right in front of Lecter, grabbing him and immediately rushing over to safety.
And although Lecter was feeling quite happy about, being reunited with his best friend, he would then see Shigaraki then place his hand on the ground, causing it to be very difficult for Deku to escape, as basically Shigaraki was making it really hard for him to slip away from their grasp. And to make it even worse was the fact that Kodagiri was spamming portals all around, catching Deku off guard as he would force his body to weave out of the way. Now, while Deku was doing this is when Lecter then realizes something, as looking into Deku's eyes, he sees something that he has barely seen before. Heck, he has never seen before. This being actual fear in Deku's eyes. But not for his life, no. It was for Lecter's safety. As you see, the thing is, when Deku saw Kodagiri and Shigaraki turn his attention onto Lecter, the scene about Lecter being captured immediately played in Deku's head. And fearing for his best friend's life and wanting to keep him safe, Deku acted on impulse. So due to this, Deku's only instinct at this very moment was to run away, not fight at all. And Lecter, seeing how terrified Deku is, as he'll be there rushing through all the obstacles, is when Lecter will then tell Deku that everything was going to be okay. Now Deku, hearing this, doesn't respond as he continues dodging out of the way, as Lecter then tells Deku that he's more than confident that he would be able to take them on, as Deku, hearing this, then tells Lecter that it's not about him taking on the villains, it's about keeping him safe. As you see, unironically, Deku was already showing some major character growth, most about the fact that he was prioritizing Lecter's safety over just simply beating up the villains and winning. And Lecter, hearing this, although he was feeling quite happy, he knew that by this point now he was more than safe. As after all, by this point, Deku had finally arrived next to the classmates, and right as he was about to make his escape, this is when Lecter then tells Deku that he should go ahead and take care of the villains to help out All Might. Now Deku, hearing this, will look at Lecter as if he was crazy, but this is when Lecter then gives Deku the cool homie speech, basically, letting him know that he's the real deal and that he has full confidence that he'll be able to take care of everything. And not only that, but Deku technically already did his job. He already saved Lecter, and not only that, but he already made sure that they were a safe distance away from the villains. That meant that Deku no longer needed to run away. And not only that, but that also meant that Deku was able to go all out, since Lecter was really confident that Deku would be able to take on the villains. But yet, even with all this opportunity, Deku was still very hesitant, mostly because of the fact that he was still scared about what could happen if he were to turn his attention back onto the villains. Would they be able to get another one up on him? Would they be able to take Lecter away? Would he have failed to protect his friend once again? As Deku was feeling true fear by that thought, as he then begins to remember everything that happened to his parents as he eventually found out about what happened to them, and also about what happened to Weiss Logia, as Deku just did not want to lose anyone else, especially someone like his best friend. Yet, even with all this fear though, this is when suddenly Deku would then look at Lecter, as Lecter would then tell Deku that he has full faith in him, as he would end up telling Deku that even if he were to end up getting captured, he was 100% sure that at the end of the day, Deku would still be there to rescue him. And Deku, just seeing how much confidence Lecter had in him, would then begin to actually feel kind of overwhelmed by it all, as he then begins to smile. This is when he would then get up, telling Lecter that he's going to be right back. As he ends up turning to the rest of his classmates, thanking them for being here, as this is when he would then tell them to stay right there, as he has to take care of something very quickly. As this is when suddenly Deku would then envelop himself in a white energy, as just like that, he would then suddenly disappear right in front of their eyes as he rushes towards the villains. As now the final battle between Deku versus the League of Villains would then begin. We will see Deku as he ends up arriving there at the scene, as all the villains would be there looking at him, with Shigaraki letting Deku know that he won't be escaping from them anytime soon. But Deku, after hearing this, just calmly tells them that he's not planning to escape, but better yet, he's planning to turn them in. As now that Deku had made sure that the person he cared about was safe, he can now go all out against them, and he makes it very clear. As without any hesitation, he will then enter into his white drive, as he then immediately begins to make a mocking hand motion, telling the villains to come at him. As without another word, this is where we will then see all the villains then rush at Deku, each one of them throwing their own attacks, as Deku would then begin to smirk as he dodges them all, right before rushing at Kodagiri, since he knew that Kodagiri was the one that was basically their escape option, and basically he was the biggest threat there besides Shigaraki and Dabi. As Deku had been able to dodge all of Kodagiri's portals and actually lands him with a white dragon's fist, as this causes Kodagiri to actually fall unconscious immediately, as Deku made sure not to hold back against them, knocking him out quickly, as now that left the rest of them. Now the rest of the League of Villains were once again caught off guard by how fast Deku was, but they didn't give up, especially Shigaraki, as he slams his hand into the ground, causing a generous amount of destruction all around and pushing Deku back. But yet, even with all this is when Deku would then disappear, as this is when Shigaraki would then hear a voice behind him. Wow, that did quite a lot, but you think you can do a little bit more than that, buddy? As Shigaraki, hearing Deku's voice, would then turn around, only to then get elbowed in the face as he gets sent flying. But just as Shigaraki had been sent flying, this is when both Dabi and Twice would then rush at Deku, with Dabi sending out a generous wave of flames, and Twice sending out a generous amount of clones. As both of them would then try to make a combination attack between the two of them, but unfortunately for them, even with that it didn't work out, as Deku would then send out a White Dragon's Roar, as this attack would immediately destroy the clones and also push back Dabi's flames. But while this was going on, this is when Toga would then suddenly sneak up on Deku, as she tries to stab him, only for Deku to then dodge out of the way and knock her out with a neck chop. As now, just like that means that 2 members were down, and only a couple of them left to go. Now Shigaraki would quickly recover, as after seeing that Toga had been knocked out and also Kurogiri, he once again gets even angrier, as now by this point now, the League of Villains then decide to kind of combine their attacks together, as they're trying their best to overwhelm Deku, with Deku just avoiding them all and literally showing exactly how outmatched they are, releasing a variety of different Dragon Slayer attacks, such as White Dragon's Claw, White Dragon's Iron Fist. He even goes ahead and uses other techniques that he learned, such as Holy Ray, which is like a ginormous beam that Deku is able to shoot out, similar to the Kamehameha Wave, and overall, Deku is just simply overwhelming them. As now turning to the present moment, we will then see the rest of the League of Villains, but unfortunately many of them were already unconscious, as they just simply were not able to keep up, as the only one currently right now being conscious would be none other than Shigaraki. Now Shigaraki would be there as he glares angrily at Deku, but unfortunately there was just simply nothing he could do. He was still too weak at this point. As Shigaraki would be there on his knees, cursing out Deku, asking him exactly who he is or what is he, with Deku about to respond, only to then get hit with a side attack by none other than All For One. As you see, by this point now, All Might's transformation has been, done pretty much, and not only that, but he's standing on his last legs. So that meant that basically All For One had his attention shifted to Deku, and seeing that Deku was wide open, he decided to attack him. As Deku will be sent flying and actually gets pretty badly injured by the attack, as All For One will be there looking at him menacingly. Now Shigaraki, seeing what just happened, would immediately begin to glaze All For One, while also putting down Deku as he begins to laugh at him, telling him that he stands no chance against him, and more precisely, he stood no chance against All For One, since All For One in Shigaraki's eyes was perfect. But yet, even after facing off against the League of Villains, and even after taking a direct blow from All For One, Deku was being shown being able to get up. As by this point now, Deku was feeling tired, and not only that, but by this point now, he was feeling quite a bit of pain thanks to the attack that All For One had led on him, since after all, Deku was caught off guard, mind you. But yet, even with all of this, Deku was still able to get up, as he ends up letting him know that even after all this, he was still gonna win, with All For One asking how is that even possible, since it seems as if Deku was standing on his last legs. As Deku will be looking down for a few seconds, this is when suddenly he would then begin to power up his white drive, but this is when it would then begin to change. As you see, while in this white drive mode, this is when Deku's expression then begins to change, as he becomes much more feral, and not only that, but his appearance becomes much more wild, as we actually begin to see like white dragon scales appear on different parts of Deku's body, as Deku wouldn't tell them that even with his back against the wall, even when he's at his limits, he will still come out on top, as that's exactly what a hero is supposed to do. As just like that, this is when Deku would then release a roar, as he then reveals his new form, this being the power of Dragon Force, the highest form of mastery that a Dragon Slayer can have, as Deku would be there wielding this power for the first time ever. All For One would be there looking at it, feeling mesmerized, as this was something he would then begin to release a bunch of tendrils as his greed begins to get the better of him, as he tells Deku to hand over his quirk, as he then shoots out a ginormous amount of these black tendrils that are meant to stab into Deku. Yet even with them, Deku is able to go ahead and dodge out of the way, as he's able to maneuver and easily outspeed All For One. As this is when suddenly Deku would then appear right in front of All For One, and then suddenly punched him so hard that he gets sent flying, only for Deku to then appear in the very direction where All For One was going to get sent flying. As for the very next moment, this is where we will then get to see All For One get tossed around like a volleyball, as he gets tossed around in different parts of the area, with each collision that Deku was throwing causing ginormous shockwaves and blowing everyone away. All the while, Shigaraki would be there looking on in complete horror as he'll see his master and basically his father over here getting tossed around and getting shown as nothing more but a joke, as Deku would be there completely overwhelming him before finally punching All For One down to the ground as he ended up coughing up quite a large amount of blood. As All For One would be there seeing Deku descending, this is when he would then begin to actually use his quirks to the maximum ability as he creates a ginormous beam from his hands, as he shoots them out at Deku, cursing him out, with Deku seeing the beam actually smiling. As this is when we would then see a ginormous amount of Dragon Slayer energy then gather into Deku's fist, as Deku would then call out the technique, White Dragon Slayer Secret Arts, Holy Nova, Deku would say, as just like that, after announcing the attack, This is when suddenly we will then see Deku's fist then grow even more dangerously, as he would then suddenly throw a punch that pierces directly through the beam that All For One has shot out. As All For One will be looking on in pure amazement, as Deku had been able to pierce through his attack easily before finally landing the blow onto him. As soon as the Holy Nova connected with All For One, he would then suddenly end up getting enveloped with a generous amount of white energy, as he can do nothing more but curse, as we end up seeing his entire body then begins to actually get destroyed by it, as we see him literally get broken down before eventually turning into nothing. All while Deku will be looking on, screaming out his attack, as we will then see a ginormous explosion then be released. As right after this collision, we will then see a ginormous amount of smoke then begin to fill up the entire area, as everyone looks on in suspense, only for the smoke to then clear, as they will then see something surprising. As even after using all those different attacks, even after taking on the League of Villains, and even defeating All For One, Deku will be shown still standing. As now ripping a page directly from All Might's book, this is when Deku would then suddenly raise his fist in the air, as this will be the sign that he won the battle. And immediately people seeing this would then begin to cheer, as everyone begins to cheer about the fact that All For One had been defeated, with All Might being there looking on in pure amazement before finally he then turns his attention to Shigaraki. Now Shigaraki would be there as he sees that All For One's body is like gone, like that guy is disappeared, he's no longer there, as he can do nothing more but actually cry out tears, as he lost him, the guy that he saw as a father, and the one who had been there for him since day one. As just like that, this is when Shigaraki knew officially that he had lost. As now with All For One gone and the rest of the League of Villains now taken care of, this is where we're now able to do one last time skip. So now flashing forward through multiple years and also multiple different events that passed by now, we now take a good look into the future as we end up seeing multiple things going down. This being the fact that society has grew much more technological, and not only that, but heroes are still around. And not only that, but we will see that majority of Class 1A actually took up the top ranking hero spots. As even after Deku's accomplishments, they themselves had still been able to actually accomplish many great things in their lives. With many people already claiming that Class 1A, or Deku's generation as some would call it, was the best generation that was out there. Especially since they brought them their new symbol of peace, the new #1 hero. As currently right now taking the very top spot when it comes to hero rankings and being the best hero right now would be none other than the light hero himself, Sting. As right now we will then see Izuku Midoriya as he'll be jumping from rooftop to rooftop using his light Dragon Slayer magic to move even faster, before the very final scene we will see of him will be jumping up into the air as he would then be looking on at a villain sight that was going on as he smirks in anticipation for the battle ahead of him. As we will then see this very moment then be transitioned to the front of an article, as the title of the article will be known as the best #1 hero, as this will be the end to What If Deku Was Sting's Reincarnation. Thank y'all so much for being here, y'all. I really hope you guys did enjoy this What If. I had a very great time with this one. First things first though, I do want to say thank you to Zether once again for being here on the channel. I really hope you guys did enjoy our collaboration. If you guys want to see more than that, then please type down below in the comment section, or better yet, if you guys want to see one immediately, then you guys can go ahead and see another video on Zether's channel, where he's going to pretty much upload his part and basically like his own version of this What If, this being the Shadow Dragon Slayer, which I'm going to be collabing with him on that one as well. So you guys already know what to do. Go ahead and just watch that video. It's going to be fire. You guys already know. But still, nonetheless, y'all, I do want to say thank y'all so much for supporting me, as I wouldn't be able to do as much as I am doing now if it wasn't for you guys being here to support me. As I'm truly am grateful for you guys and every single one of you that decided to take the time out of your day to spend time watching my videos. So once again, thank you very much. But still, besides all that, y'all, I do understand that this video has gone on for quite long enough. So with that being said, it's your host Seishi Samurai here, and he's signing off. So peace and have a lovely day.
Colors, switch the color, 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 switch it, switch the color, colors, switch the color, switch the color, switch the color, switch the color, switch the color.